I carried the folder like a gift, thinking my son would smile when I walked into his office. Instead, silence fell. His employees froze, their eyes darting between us. Derek stood, jaw tight, voice slicing through the air, "You don't belong here." My chest clenched as he waved to security. Two men stepped forward, their hands already reaching for me. The folder trembled in my grip, no longer a gift, suddenly, it was evidence. My own son was erasing me, in front of strangers. What would he do next? Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where you're watching from right now. The morning after that humiliation, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee. The mug felt too heavy in my hand, though I'd lifted it 1,000 times before. Steam curled upward, blurring the framed photograph of my late wife on the counter. She used to say the house smelled different when something was wrong, like the air itself grew cautious. That morning, I smelled it too. Derek shuffled in, late, his tie still crooked, his phone already glued to his hand. He didn't look at me. The only sound was the scrape of his chair against the tile. He sat down, not across from me, but angled, like I wasn't worth facing. On the table between us, the folder sat closed. I'd placed it there the night before, hoping he'd glance at it, ask about it, maybe even apologize. Instead, his eyes slid over it like it was clutter. He grabbed his mug, filled it halfway, then finally spoke. "You walk in like you still matter. You don't." The words landed harder than anything he'd said at the office. There, he'd been performing for his staff. Here, it was just him and me, no audience, no excuse. His voice carried the sharpness of truth, not theater. I swallowed, forcing calm into my tone. "That folder," I nudged it toward him, the cardboard edge brushing against his sleeve. "It's about the retirement savings. Some decisions need both of us." He sipped his coffee and let the silence stretch. Then, with one deliberate flick of his wrist, he pushed the folder aside, sliding it against the salt shaker like it was nothing. "Handle it yourself," he muttered. "Or better, don't. You've done enough already." The air went still. I heard the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the faint creak of pipes. Every ordinary sound was suddenly too loud, too present, filling the gap where his respect should have been. I stared at the folder. Inside were pages representing decades of work, overtime shifts, skipped vacations, careful budgeting. It wasn't just numbers, it was my life compressed into neat, official columns. And to him, it was less than trash. "You think shoving me aside makes you bigger?" My voice cracked, but I steadied it. "I built this roof. Every wall around us, your mother and I paid for with sweat." He chuckled, low and dismissive, without even looking up from his phone. "Then maybe it's time you stopped reminding me. You had your turn. Now it's mine." The screen of his phone lit up, reflecting in his glasses. His thumb scrolled as if my words didn't exist. He might as well have been alone in the room. My jaw tightened. I forced my eyes back to the folder, the edge now bent from his shove. I reached out and straightened it, not for him, but for myself. A man clings to symbols when respect has been stripped away. "Derek," I said quietly, "when you were a boy, you used to climb on my shoulders to reach the top shelf. You never doubted I'd hold you steady." He looked up finally, his expression flat, unimpressed. "And now?" I met his eyes. "Now you're the one trying to knock me down." He smirked and stood, leaving his mug half full. "Don't be dramatic. Just stay out of my way. People talk enough already, you don't need to make it worse." With that, he grabbed his jacket, leaving the folder stranded on the table, like a witness to my humiliation. The door slammed behind him. For a long moment, I sat in silence. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, untouched. I lifted it anyway, sipped the bitterness, and stared at the folder. That cardboard shell suddenly felt heavier than any briefcase I had ever carried. It wasn't just paper, it was proof of how easily I could be erased. I ran a hand over its cover, the rough surface grounding me. My wife's photo caught my eye again, her smile steady, kind. I whispered into the empty kitchen, "He's forgetting who built his foundation." The clock ticked on, each second louder than the last. I heard footsteps outside, the mail carrier, the dog from across the street barking, the faint murmur of a neighbor's conversation. Whispers. Always whispers. I knew then that the insult at breakfast wasn't a mistake or a moment of anger. It was the beginning of something deliberate. Derek wasn't just dismissing me in private, he was preparing to erase me in public. The folder lay between us still, untouched, unwanted. But I knew I couldn't let it go. Because in the end, that folder was all I had left to remind him that I wasn't finished yet. And deep down, I feared he already had plans to take even that away. The folder sat there like a target, bent, bruised, and waiting to be stolen. You walk in like you still matter. You don't. Dinner should have been a quiet reprieve, but the air around the table was already sharp before I even sat down. Amanda had set the plates, but she didn't meet my eyes. Derek carved the roast with quick, heavy strokes, his movements clipped, impatient. The clink of knife against porcelain sounded more like a warning than a meal. The folder sat at my place, where I had placed it deliberately. A reminder, a request, a bridge. But in Amanda's eyes, it was a weapon. She glanced at it as though it was an unwelcome guest, then at Derek, a signal passing silently between them. I cut into my food, though it tasted like cardboard in my mouth. Amanda broke the silence first. "This can't go on," she said, her voice calm but cold. "You can't keep walking into Derek's office, making scenes. People are starting to talk." My fork paused mid-air. "Talk?" I asked, forcing my voice level. Derek slammed his knife down, the sound making Amanda flinch even though she had surely expected it. "You don't understand. My reputation is everything. When you show up, uninvited, you make me look weak." I stared at him. "Weak? Derek, I'm your father. I was proud to walk through those doors. Proud to see your name on that glass wall." He shook his head. "You don't get it. That's not how it looked. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You don't belong there anymore." The words hit harder than the security guard's hands the day before. Belonging wasn't something I thought I'd need to defend in my own son's world. Amanda leaned forward, her eyes sharp as a blade. "We're giving you a choice. Respect our rules, or stay away entirely." My hand went to the folder beside my plate, the cardboard edge familiar now under my fingertips. "Respect your rules?" I repeated, tasting the bitterness in the phrase. She nodded. "Piece by piece, we're building something. And piece by piece, you're tearing it down. If you care about Derek at all, you'll stop. You'll stay out of his office, out of his business, and out of his way." The folder felt heavier than the plate of food before me. Inside it lay accounts, plans, proof of everything I had worked to secure, not just for me, but for Derek. And here I was, told to step aside, as though decades of sacrifice had earned me nothing but exile. I met Derek's eyes. "Is that what you want too? For me to disappear?" He didn't answer right away. His jaw flexed, his fingers drummed against the table. Then he leaned back, the verdict leaving his lips without hesitation. "Yes. Stay away from my office. Stay out of my business. If you can't, then don't expect to be welcome in this house either." The knife twisted. He hadn't just set a boundary, he had drawn a line of war. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the floor. "After all these years, after every step I carried you, this is what I get?" Amanda's eyes narrowed. "This is what happens when you don't know when to let go." I stood, my gaze falling on the folder. I wanted to take it, clutch it to my chest like a shield, but I forced myself to leave it on the table, just for a moment, to see what they would do. Neither of them reached for it. Neither of them cared. That hurt more than words. Without another bite, I walked out of the dining room, my footsteps echoing through the hallway. Behind me, the house was too quiet, until Amanda's voice, sharp and certain, cut through. Piece by piece. The words lingered like poison, chasing me to the door. I stepped outside into the cool night. The air smelled of rain, though no storm had broken yet. Across the street, the Johnsons were watering their lawn, pretending not to notice as I left with my jacket thrown over one arm. But I saw the way Mrs. Johnson's eyes lingered too long, the way Mr. Johnson leaned in as she whispered. By the time I reached the sidewalk, their voices carried, faint but undeniable. Something's not right in that house. Did you see his face? Looked like he'd been slapped. The shame burned hotter than the night air. Gossip spreads faster than wildfire in this neighborhood. By morning, they would all know, the man who built this house, who raised this family, was now being pushed out of his own life. I reached back once more for the door, but I didn't open it. Instead, I stared at the windows glowing faintly in the dark. My own home felt like a stranger's silhouette. The folder was still inside, abandoned on the table. A symbol I couldn't escape. And as I stood there, the words echoed again, Amanda's voice haunting me like a curse. Piece by piece. For the first time, I realized they weren't just disrespecting me, they were dismantling me, one piece at a time. Either respect our rules, or stay away entirely. The next morning, the house felt colder than the autumn wind slipping through the cracks in the windows. I made my way to the kitchen, the folder clutched under my arm like a lifeline. I placed it back on the table, its edges already frayed from being shoved aside one too many times. Derek entered with his phone pressed to his ear, Amanda trailing behind him with that rehearsed air of composure she wore like armor. He ended the call abruptly when he saw me, his jaw tightening. "You won't need money at your age," Derek said, reaching for the coffee pot. His tone was casual, almost bored, but the words were sharpened like a blade. Amanda placed a slim stack of documents in front of me, sliding them across the table with perfectly manicured fingers. "Just sign these. It will make things easier for everyone." I glanced down. Banking authorizations, investment redirections, signatures already marked with sticky tabs where my pen was expected to land. My chest tightened. I pushed the papers back toward her, shaking my head. "No. Not without knowing exactly what this is." Amanda's smile was sweet but hollow. "It's just paperwork, William. Simplifying accounts. Streamlining things. You don't need to carry these burdens anymore." Her words dripped with practiced patience, the kind you use on a stubborn child. I tapped the folder with one finger. "This is my life's work. Every dollar accounted for, every late shift, every cancelled vacation. You think I'll just hand it over?" Derek snorted, sipping his coffee. "You sound paranoid. You raised me to take responsibility, didn't you? Well, this is me taking it." I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. Sliding it out, I saw the notification, withdrawal alert, $5,000 from joint account. My pulse spiked. I hadn't authorized it. My eyes snapped to Derek. His smirk told me everything I needed to know. "You accessed my account?" My voice was low, steady, but my hand trembled against the table. He didn't answer, just reached for the checkbook I kept in the drawer by the fridge. With deliberate arrogance, he slipped it into his jacket pocket as if it belonged to him. "That's mine," I said, rising from my chair. Derek finally met my eyes. "Correction, it's ours. And I'm using it to make sure we survive. Your retirement dreams aren't more important than our future." Amanda folded her arms, backing him up. "He's right. You've had your time. You've built what you could. Now it's our turn to build higher. Don't drag us down because you're clinging to control. The word stung sharper than the theft itself. I looked between them, my son, my daughter-in-law, and felt a hollowness spreading through my chest. This isn't survival, I said softly. This is greed. Amanda's eyes narrowed, lips curling. Call it whatever you want. Just sign the papers, William. Do the right thing for once. I stared at the folder on the table, the only thing standing between me and complete erasure. My wife's handwriting was still on the first page, notes from years ago about college savings, about a cabin we dreamed of retiring to. Memories inked into margins. Now they wanted to strip it bare, leave it meaningless. My hand hovered over the folder, protective. You will not touch this. Not now, not ever. Derek slammed his palm against the table, rattling the cups. You think you can stop us? You're old, you're tired, and you're in the way. Sign it, or get out of the way. I felt my throat tighten, my pulse hammering in my ears. For a moment, I considered grabbing the papers, tearing them to pieces, but I held myself still. Calmness was the only weapon left to me. You've taken my checkbook. You've drained my account. You've spat on every sacrifice I made. I leaned closer, my voice low enough to slice without raising volume. But you haven't taken my dignity. And you never will. The silence that followed was heavier than the slam of his hand. Amanda's smile faltered, if only for a second. Derek's jaw clenched, the vein at his temple pulsing. I picked up the folder, tucking it firmly under my arm. You can have my checkbook. But this? I tapped the cardboard with my knuckles. This is mine. And it stays mine. Without waiting for their response, I turned and walked toward the door. The house groaned under my footsteps, the walls carrying the weight of my departure. Behind me, Amanda's voice cut through like a knife. You're making a mistake, William. A big one. I didn't answer. The door closed behind me with a finality that felt like a crack in the foundation. On the porch, the cold air hit me like truth itself. Across the street, Mrs. Johnson was pulling her trash can to the curb. She froze mid-step, eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of me clutching the folder like a shield, my face carved with anger. She whispered something to her husband, who peeked around the hedge, pretending not to stare. The whispers had begun again. Only this time, they weren't about embarrassment in an office. They were about betrayal at home. The folder pressed against my chest wasn't just protection anymore, it was the last wall between me and ruin. And I knew Derek was already planning how to tear it down. You walk in like you still matter. You don't. Sector 2. Now echoed here with. You've taken my checkbook. You've drained my account. But you haven't taken my dignity. And you never will. The house no longer sounded like home. Every step on the hardwood floor echoed differently now, like the boards knew who still belonged here, and who did not. I carried the folder into my room and set it carefully on the bed, as though laying down a wounded companion. Its edges were worn, corners bent, but it was still mine. I opened the closet, reached for the suitcase tucked behind winter coats, and pulled it free. The zipper screamed against the silence as I dragged it open. Each shirt I folded felt heavier than cloth. Each pair of socks dropped into the case sounded like stones hitting water. Amanda's voice reached me first, muffled from the living room. He won't actually leave. He's bluffing. Then Derek, sharp and certain, if he wants respect, he can earn it by staying quiet. Otherwise, he's out. The words pressed harder against my chest than the folded sweaters I laid inside. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the folder. For years, it had been just a container, numbers, signatures, lines on paper. Now, it was all that stood between me and being erased completely. The door creaked open. Amanda leaned against the frame, arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the suitcase. "Packing?" she asked, her tone mocking but laced with relief. I didn't answer. My hands folded another shirt, deliberate, controlled. She stepped closer. "Good. Maybe you'll finally understand. Either obey Derek, or vanish." The words cut deeper than I expected. Obey, or vanish. Not advice. Not request. A sentence. I finally met her gaze. "You think silence makes you powerful. But it only makes you cruel." Her smirk faltered for a moment, but then she straightened. "Cruel is what happens when people don't know when to step aside." I turned back to the suitcase. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of keeping myself calm. I refused to give her the outburst she wanted. "Where's Derek?" I asked. "In his office," she said flatly. "Planning without interruptions." The dismissal in her voice carried as much weight as the insult itself. I reached for the folder, ready to place it on top of my packed clothes. But my hand met nothing but sheets. My stomach dropped. I searched the bed, the floor, the dresser. The folder was gone. My chest tightened as I spun toward Amanda. Her expression gave her away, smug, satisfied, lips curved in a smile too small to be kind. "You're looking for this?" she asked softly, almost singing the words. The door opened wider. Derek stepped in, folder in hand, holding it like a prize. My pulse roared in my ears. "That's mine." He shook his head slowly. "Not anymore. You had your chance to work with us. Instead, you fought us. So now, we'll handle things our way." I stepped forward, but Amanda blocked me with the ease of someone who had rehearsed this moment. Her perfume was sharp, suffocating. "Sit down, William," Derek said. His voice carried the authority of a man who believed he had already won. "If you know what's good for you, you'll let go." My fists clenched. For a second, the urge to grab him, to tear the folder from his hands, surged through me. But I froze. Violence would only hand them the story they wanted, the unstable old man lashing out. Instead, I drew a slow breath. "You think stealing my life makes you stronger? It only proves you're afraid." Derek's jaw tightened, but his smirk didn't fade. "Afraid? No. Prepared. You've lived long enough in control. It's my turn now." Amanda rested her hand on his arm, her nails brushing the folder. "Don't waste your energy on him, Derek. He's already gone." The words landed like a verdict. I forced myself to smile, a thin, deliberate expression. "You believe you've won. But this isn't the end. It's the beginning." Amanda scoffed. "Beginning of what? You leaving quietly?" I bent down, zipped the suitcase with one sharp pull. The sound sliced through the air, final and undeniable. "They thought I would bend," I whispered to myself. "Instead, I'm walking out standing tall." I gripped the suitcase handle, the weight grounding me. I left the room without asking for the folder. Not because I had given up, but because battles are won by timing, not desperation. Down the hallway, the walls felt narrower, the shadows darker. I passed by the photograph of my wife, her smile eternal, untouched by this poison. I whispered a promise beneath my breath: "They won't take everything. Not while I breathe." The front door loomed ahead. My suitcase wheels rattled over the wooden floor, echoing like drumbeats of retreat, but in my chest, it wasn't retreat at all. It was the first step into war. I opened the door and felt the night air rush against me, sharp and cold. A neighbor across the street paused mid-conversation, watching me with wide eyes. The whispers would spread again. They always did. But this time, I didn't care. Let them whisper. Let them speculate. Because tomorrow, I would no longer be their quiet victim. I left the house with only a suitcase in my hand. But inside, behind locked doors, Derek held the folder, my life, my weapon. And I knew I would take it back. Obey, or vanish. The suitcase wheels rattled like thunder as I dragged them across the porch and down the driveway. The night air bit at my skin, sharp with the scent of rain on pavement. Behind me, the door shut with a hollow thud that didn't just close a house, it sealed a chapter. At the curb, I lifted the suitcase into the trunk of my car. For a moment I just stood there, gripping the handle, breathing hard. I had walked out with clothes and a toothbrush, but Derek held the folder, the real weight, the real weapon. By dawn, I checked into a cheap motel off the highway. The lobby smelled of bleach and stale coffee. The clerk barely looked at me as he slid a keycard across the counter. The room itself was a box, thin curtains, flickering lamp, a bedspread patterned like camouflage for stains. But it was quiet, and for the first time in days, the quiet felt like mine. The next morning, I carried myself to a lawyer's office. The walls there gleamed with polished wood, diplomas framed in heavy glass, the faint tick of a grandfather clock filling the silence. I sat across from a young attorney, her pen poised above a legal pad. "I need to protect my estate," I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. "My son and his wife, they're trying to take it from me." She leaned forward. "Do you have proof?" That was the dagger. My chest hollowed as I realized the folder, my proof, wasn't in my possession. Derek had it. And without it, my words sounded thinner, weaker. The lawyer scribbled a note. "You should know, there's already activity on your accounts. A power of attorney form was submitted last week. Claims you signed it." My pulse spiked. "I didn't." She slid a copy across the desk. My signature stared back at me, flawless, but forged. The room tilted. My hand gripped the armrest hard enough to ache. "That's a lie," I whispered. The lawyer nodded, her tone even. "I believe you. But the bank will take this as binding until we challenge it. Whoever filed it knew what they were doing." I closed my eyes, seeing Derek's smug expression, Amanda's careful hands sliding papers across the dinner table. This wasn't improvisation. This had been planned. When I left the office, the sunlight felt cruel, too bright against the betrayal settling deeper into my bones. I walked straight to the bank, folder or no folder, determined to face it head-on. Inside, the marble floor gleamed under harsh fluorescent light. The teller smiled politely until she checked her screen. Then her smile dimmed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harper," she said carefully. "According to our records, your son is now an authorized co-signer. You'll need his approval for further withdrawals." The word slapped me harder than Derek's insults ever had. "I never gave him that authority," I said, my voice rising. "That document is a forgery." She lowered her voice, glancing at the line of customers behind me. "Sir, maybe we can discuss this in private. There have been concerns raised." Her hesitation said it all. Concerns. Not about Derek. About me. I followed her into a side office, where the manager waited. His tie was too tight, his eyes already rehearsed with pity. "Mr. Harper," he began, "we've received word that you may be struggling. That perhaps you're not able to manage these affairs clearly anymore." My chest tightened, my hands curling into fists. "Who told you that?" The manager hesitated. "Your family." The word stung like fire. My family. My blood. My betrayers. I leaned across the desk, my voice trembling with restrained fury. "I built those accounts. Every dollar in them came from my sweat. You look me in the eye and tell me I don't understand my own money." The manager adjusted his glasses, but his tone didn't change. "I'm not questioning your past, Mr. Harper. Only your present capacity. We've been advised you might be vulnerable. The humiliation settled like a stone in my stomach. Vulnerable. That's what they were calling me now. Derek's lies had spread beyond the dinner table, beyond the office. They'd reached institutions, places that measured respect in signatures and balances. I walked out stiffly, my steps echoing across the marble floor. As I reached the entrance, I caught sight of Mrs. Johnson from across the street. She was at the counter, her eyes widening when she saw me. Her lips parted, and I could already imagine the whispers, "Poor old man. Doesn't even control his own accounts anymore." By the time I reached the sidewalk, I felt stripped bare. My neighbors, the bank, maybe even strangers passing on the street, all of them would carry the story Derek and Amanda had crafted. The proud man reduced to a liability. At the motel that evening, I stared at my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. The man staring back looked older than yesterday, lines deeper, eyes hollow. For a moment, I almost believed their story, that I was fading, weak, irrelevant. Then I thought of the folder. Still in Derek's hands, but still mine. Proof could be stolen, forged, hidden, but truth had a way of clawing its way to light. I pressed my palms flat against the sink. They can forge my name, I whispered to the empty room, but they can't erase my fight. I turned out the bathroom light, the room sinking into shadow. Outside, a car door slammed, voices rose, laughter carried. Somewhere out there, Derek and Amanda thought they were winning. But inside me, a different sound had begun, steady, certain, unyielding. The sound of resistance sharpening. They thought I had walked out defeated. But I wasn't gone, I was gathering. And soon, the first strike would come. They can forge my name, but they can't erase my fight. By dawn, the motel room had become my war room. The flickering lamp cast long shadows across the desk where I spread my papers like a battlefield map. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee from the lobby downstairs, and the silence was broken only by the ticking of the cheap clock on the wall. The folder was gone, stolen from me, but I still had copies. Old statements, insurance letters, receipts carefully tucked into a battered envelope I had hidden in my briefcase years ago. Amanda and Derek thought taking the folder meant stripping me bare, but I had learned long ago that a man should never keep all his weapons in one place. I laid out the papers, one by one. Decades of transactions stared back at me, black ink against white. Each line was a memory, the down payment on the house, the tuition checks, the mortgage installments. Sacrifices carved into numbers. They had turned those sacrifices into chains. Now I would turn them into knives. I picked up the phone and dialed the bank. My voice was steady, formal. "This is William Harper. I need to adjust my accounts immediately." The agent hesitated, pulling up my file. "Sir, I see your son is listed." "Remove him," I cut in, my voice like steel. "Effective now. Freeze all joint access. Reinstate single authorization." My authorization. The keyboard clattered on the other end. "Understood. That will require a confirmation code." I gave it, the numbers rolling off my tongue like scripture. A moment later, the agent confirmed. "Your son's access has been revoked." I hung up, my breath leaving in a slow, steady exhale. The first chain had snapped. Next, the mortgage company. I canceled the autopay I had set years ago, back when I thought helping Derek carry his load was love, not fuel for entitlement. "The payment will default next cycle," the clerk warned. "Let it," I said, my voice cold. Then the insurance company. "Cancel both vehicle policies tied to my account," I ordered. The representative on the other end stammered. "Sir, are you sure? That will leave the vehicles uninsured." "I'm sure." Each cancellation felt like pulling a trigger. Every confirmation email that dinged into my inbox was another bullet lodged in the walls of Derek's fragile kingdom. Finally, I logged into my personal bank account online. For years, I had been transferring a monthly sum to support Derek and Amanda's lifestyle, groceries, utilities, the little luxuries they never seemed to thank me for. My cursor hovered over the recurring payment button. My finger trembled, not from doubt, but from the weight of years. Click. Deleted. For the first time in years, I whispered to myself, staring at the blank screen where those transfers used to be, my account balance belongs only to me. The motel room seemed to exhale with me. The silence grew softer, no longer suffocating, but liberating. I leaned back in the creaking chair and let the memories flood in. The long nights I'd worked overtime to pay their tuition. The weekends I'd skipped fishing trips to repair Derek's car. The savings I'd poured into Amanda's business ideas that went nowhere. Love had blinded me into financing my own erasure. But not anymore. The folder was gone, but the fight wasn't. The folder had been a shield. These papers, these phone calls, these were my strikes. I stacked the remaining documents neatly, folded them back into the envelope, and placed it on the motel desk like a loaded weapon waiting for the next battle. The phone buzzed. A new voicemail. Derek's voice, sharp and furious. "Dad, what the hell did you do?" The mortgage bounced. "The bank says my access is denied. Call me back, now." Another voicemail, Amanda this time, her tone sweet but cracking at the edges. "William, please, this isn't necessary. We're family. Let's just talk about this calmly." I didn't delete them, not yet. I let the words hang in the air, trophies of their first stumble. I poured myself a glass of water from the tap, lifted it slowly, and whispered, "To the storm." Then I drank. By nightfall, I knew their phones would keep ringing, their bills would bounce, their comfortable lives would start to splinter. They thought I was gone, silenced, irrelevant. But my silence had become their undoing. The battle had only just begun. Tomorrow, they would wake to chaos, and realize their war against me had finally found its cost. For the first time in years, my account balance belongs only to me. By Wednesday, my phone showed 12 missed calls. By Friday, there were 22. Each voicemail painted the same story, panic blooming in their voices, desperation leaking through the cracks of arrogance. The first ones were sharp, Derek's tone clipped, furious. "Dad, the mortgage bounced. Do you know what you've done? Call me back." Hours later, Amanda's voice replaced his, sugary but brittle. "William, please, this is just a misunderstanding. We can fix this if you'll only talk to us." By the third day, Derek's anger had cooled into something closer to fear. "They're calling from the bank. They're threatening foreclosure. Dad, answer me." I sat in the dim motel room, the cheap clock ticking above the desk, my phone buzzing every few hours like a distant alarm. I didn't answer. I listened once, then deleted each message, the sound of their unraveling becoming my own quiet symphony. The motel air was stale, but it smelled like freedom. I walked the halls at night, passing faded wallpaper and buzzing fluorescent lights, my footsteps echoing in the hollow corridor. For the first time in years, my silence wasn't weakness. It was control. By Saturday, Amanda's voice cracked in the recording. "Please, William. The insurance was cancelled, they won't let us renew without you. Do you want us to get into an accident? Do you want your grandchildren at risk?" Her attempt at guilt slid off me like water off stone. I remembered every time they'd called me useless, every time they'd pushed the folder aside as though it meant nothing. Now they needed me, and all they had were words. At the diner down the road, I sipped bitter coffee and listened to the murmur of voices in the next booth. Two men in work shirts leaned close, whispering. "Heard Derek's checks bounced this week." "Yeah, and his wife's car's not insured. Can't even drive it legally." I didn't turn my head, but a quiet satisfaction spread through me. The storm had reached beyond their walls now. Whispers were slipping into the community, just as their lies about me once had. When I returned to the motel, the red light on my phone blinked again. Derek this time, his voice quieter, lower. You can't do this to us. You can't just cut us off. We're family. Family. The word had lost its weight in his mouth. That night, I placed the envelope of documents on the table, arranging them like chess pieces. Mortgage. Insurance. Transfers. Every move I'd made was small, precise, deliberate. And yet, together, they had built a cage around Derek and Amanda. A cage of their own debts, their own carelessness. Near midnight, the knock came. Sharp, urgent. I froze, staring at the motel door. The peephole showed nothing but a sliver of shadow. Then a voice, Amanda's, trembling, broken. William, please. We just want to talk. Her voice shook, but I stayed still, my breath caught in my chest. I didn't open the door. I didn't answer. I stood in silence, letting her words seep through the thin motel walls until they dissolved into nothing. After a long pause, footsteps retreated, heels clicking against the walkway. The silence returned, heavier, but it was my silence again. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands pressed against my knees, staring at the door. She had come here, uninvited, just as I had once walked into Derek's office. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. But where I had been thrown out, I gave her nothing, not even the dignity of a reply. The motel clock ticked on. Outside, a car door slammed, and the engine roared to life. The taillights glowed red against the thin curtains as they disappeared into the night. I leaned back slowly, the envelope of papers within reach. Their world was collapsing, piece by piece, and they were only just beginning to understand. Through the peephole, I had seen nothing but shadow, but I knew this was only the beginning. The real confrontation was coming, and soon, it would no longer be at a distance. My silence wasn't weakness. It was control. The knock came harder this time, rattling the flimsy motel door on its hinges. I froze mid-step, the envelope of documents in my hand. Through the peephole, their faces appeared, Derek's, pale and angry, Amanda's, red-rimmed with exhaustion. For a moment, I considered staying silent, letting them shout at shadows. But this wasn't like the phone calls. This was flesh and blood, breath steaming in the hallway. The storm had arrived at my door. I unlatched the chain and cracked the door an inch. Their voices spilled in instantly. "Open it, Dad," Derek demanded. His voice was hoarse, ragged from days of shouting into phones. "We need to talk." Amanda tried softer, clutching her coat tight. "Please, William. We're not here to fight. Just talk." I opened the door halfway but didn't step aside. The dim hallway light cast Derek's shadow long across the carpet. He shifted from foot to foot like a man used to controlling rooms, unsettled by being left standing outside. "You're ruining us," Derek snapped. "Over what? Some stupid pride?" I met his glare evenly. "No. I'm honoring the ultimatum you gave me. You said, obey, or leave. I left." Amanda's lips trembled. "It doesn't have to be like this." Behind her, Derek clenched his fists. "We have bills piling up. Calls from creditors. You think cutting us off proves something? It just makes you look pathetic." I let the silence stretch, my eyes drifting deliberately to the envelope in my hand. "No," I said softly. "What it proves is that you depended on me more than you ever admitted." Derek bristled, stepping forward. I didn't move. The doorframe was my line, and he would not cross it. "You'll die forgotten," he hissed. "And I'll see to it." Amanda flinched at his words, her eyes darting to his face, then to mine. That was the first crack. She hadn't expected him to bear that venom aloud. I leaned against the door, calm, steady. Funny you should say that. Because the bank tells a different story. Derek froze. Amanda blinked. What do you mean? She asked. I opened the envelope slowly, like a magician revealing the final card. I pulled out a copy of a statement, sliding it against the edge of the door so the hallway light illuminated the bold numbers. A $50,000 loan application, I said, my voice level. Filed under my name. On my house. With my signature. Amanda's breath caught. What? Derek's face tightened, jaw clenching, eyes flickering between me and the paper. I tapped the signature line with my finger. Only problem is, I never signed it. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Amanda's eyes darted to Derek, searching his face for denial, for explanation. But he said nothing. His silence was louder than my accusation. You forged his name, she whispered, her voice cracking. Derek, tell me that's not true. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His shoulders rose, then fell, like a man collapsing under a weight too heavy to deny. I looked at her, not him. Now you see the man you've been defending. The one you've been calling your future. Her eyes filled with tears. She stepped back from him slightly, as though the truth itself pushed her away. Derek's anger exploded, his fist slamming against the wall. Don't you dare turn her against me. But Amanda's voice cut sharper than his fist. You lied to me, Derek. You lied to both of us. I kept my tone cold, deliberate. Forgery isn't just betrayal, it's a crime. And I have copies. Enough to bury you legally and financially. Amanda shook her head, tears spilling. I thought you were building something for us. But you were tearing it down. Her words weren't aimed at me anymore. They were aimed at him. Derek's breathing grew ragged, his fists trembling at his sides. For the first time, he looked less like a man in control and more like a cornered animal. You think you can beat me with papers? He spat. You're nothing without me. You've got no family left. I leaned closer, my voice low, steady. I had family. You buried it with every forged line, every stolen dollar. All I have left now is dignity, and that's more than you'll ever hold. Amanda's sobs filled the hall, raw and broken. Derek turned on her, his anger searching for somewhere to land. But she recoiled, hugging herself, her eyes refusing to meet his. You can walk away now, I told him, before the law walks you out later. His glare burned into me, but behind it, I saw fear. Real fear. As they turned to leave, Derek muttered low, his words like venom dripping. This isn't over. You'll regret this. Amanda didn't speak. She only looked back once, her face pale, the weight of realization pressing down. I closed the door slowly, the latch clicking into place like a verdict. My hands trembled, but not from fear. From certainty. The tide had shifted. Derek's final words echoed in my head, this isn't over. And I knew desperate men make the most dangerous promises. I had family. You buried it with every forged line, every stolen dollar. By Monday morning, my anger had cooled into something sharper, paperwork and signatures. Rage fades, but resolve hardens, and mine was solid as iron. I walked into the lawyer's office with the envelope under my arm. The receptionist's smile faltered when she saw the papers spilling from its seams, thick, messy, incriminating. She led me back to a room paneled in oak, where my attorney, Ms. Graves, rose to greet me. You look like a man ready for war, she said simply. I am, I replied, setting the envelope down with a thud. She opened it carefully, her pen poised above her notepad. Out spilled statements, copies, the forged loan application with Derek's handwriting in the margins. She scanned the pages, her brow furrowing deeper with every line. "This is enough to pursue fraud," she said, her voice firm. "Forgery, misrepresentation, abuse of power of attorney. We can file eviction papers, cancel his access legally, and protect your estate immediately." I nodded, my jaw tight. "Do it. Today." She slid a fresh document across the desk. "This is an eviction notice. It reestablishes your sole ownership. Once signed, we'll deliver it to the sheriff for service." I picked up the pen. Its weight felt different than before, no longer an instrument of compromise, but a weapon. As the ink bled onto the paper, I felt the chains Derek had wrapped around me snapping one by one. For decades, I had signed checks to support him, to keep him afloat. Now I was signing his eviction. Next, Ms. Graves produced another form. "Restraining order. Based on the threats you received." His words, "You'll die forgotten," those are enough to establish harassment. I thought of Derek's face in the motel hallway, twisted with rage. I lowered the pen again, steady this time. My signature looped across the page with the certainty of a man reclaiming his ground. By afternoon, I was sitting in the police station across town. The officer behind the desk listened quietly as I laid the papers out like evidence in a trial. The forged loan, the false power of attorney, the threats. His badge gleamed under the fluorescent light, his expression growing harder by the minute. "This is serious," he said at last. "You've done the right thing bringing it here. We'll keep watch. If they come near you again, call us immediately. They can't cross these lines now." For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight shift off my shoulders. It wasn't all on me anymore. The law was in motion, a machine too big for Derek to manipulate with charm or intimidation. Walking out of the station, I felt taller, lighter. The afternoon sun was warm against my face, and for a moment, I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. But peace didn't last. On my way back to the motel, I stopped for coffee at the corner diner. Heads turned as I walked in. Conversations quieted, eyes lingered. I caught fragments of whispers. "Isn't that Harper? Heard his son's in trouble. Fraud, they're saying. Can you believe it?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. For once, the truth was speaking louder than lies. When I returned to my room, the envelope was lighter. Papers signed, copies filed, the machine in motion. I sat at the desk, staring at the empty space where the folder used to be. Derek had taken it, but he hadn't taken me. The motel clock ticked on, steady as a drumbeat. My hands rested flat on the desk. Tomorrow, the sheriff would knock on Derek's door. Tomorrow, my son would learn what it felt like to be powerless in a house he thought was his. The pen strokes were done, the seals pressed, the orders signed. The next sound would not be mine, it would be the sheriff's knock on Derek's door. For decades, I had signed checks to support him. Now I was signing his eviction. The sheriff didn't waste time. By Tuesday afternoon, he was at the house I once called home. I wasn't there to watch, but word travels fast in a small town. By evening, the whispers had reached me at the motel, Derek's rage spilling onto the street, neighbors gathering on their porches as the eviction papers were handed over. The image stuck in my mind, my son, red-faced, screaming at a uniformed officer, his voice cracking as reality finally broke through his arrogance. By Wednesday, I saw the first cracks with my own eyes. Derek's office windows, once open and proud, were shut tight, blinds drawn like a fortress hiding its decay. I stood across the street, my collar turned up against the autumn wind, watching employees slip inside with hushed conversations and uncertain glances. One of them, a young man in a navy suit, whispered to another, not realizing I was within earshot. "Clients are pulling out. They don't trust him anymore." Can you blame them? Fraud's not just a rumor, it's documented. I let the words sink in, not with joy, but with the cold satisfaction of truth finally cracking his facade. At the motel later, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail, Amanda's voice raw with panic. "William, please, he's losing everything. Clients, investors, even his credit cards, they've all cut him off. I know he made mistakes, but he's still your son. Don't let him drown like this." Her plea tugged at something deep inside me. But the memory of Derek's sneer, the way he spat that I'd die forgotten, snuffed out any flicker of weakness. I deleted the voicemail without replying. That night, as I lay on the motel bed staring at the water-stained ceiling, I remembered the decades I'd spent signing checks to cover Derek's shortfalls. Every bounced payment, every foolish risk, always cleaned up by me. He had lived so long under the illusion that no consequence would ever stick. Now, consequence had become his shadow. By Thursday, the creditors arrived in person. I happened to be driving past the office when two men in suits stood at the entrance, arms crossed, waiting. Derek met them outside, his gestures sharp, his voice loud enough to carry across the street. "I told you, it's temporary. Funds are coming, just give me a week." But the men shook their heads, unimpressed, unyielding. One handed him a stack of papers. His shoulders slumped as he scanned the pages. He looked older in that moment, the weight of reality pressing down where arrogance once kept him tall. I parked a block away, leaning on the hood of my car, watching as Amanda stepped outside to join him. Her voice was too faint to hear, but her hands clutched his arm, her head bowed. He jerked away from her touch, the gesture harsh and public. Neighbors paused on the sidewalk, pretending to check their phones or tie their shoes, but their ears were open, their eyes sharper than ever. The whispers began again, louder this time, spilling like cracks spreading through glass. That evening, the sheriff himself called me. His voice was steady, almost respectful. "Mr. Harper, the restraining order's been served. Your son is legally bound to stay clear. If he crosses that line, you call us, no hesitation." I thanked him, my voice calm, but inside I felt a grim sort of vindication. The law had become the wall I no longer had to build with my own hands. Later that night, another voicemail. This time, Derek himself. His voice was hoarse, hollow. "Dad, they're leaving me. The investors, Amanda, everyone. You've destroyed me. I hope you're happy." I sat at the desk, staring at the cheap motel lamp, letting his words hang in the air. Destroyed. No, not destroyed, exposed. The collapse wasn't my doing. It was his, brick by brick, lie by lie. I had only stepped aside and let the truth topple the walls he built from arrogance. I whispered into the empty room, my voice steady, almost prayer-like. "I spent decades signing checks. Now I'm signing chains broken." When I lay down to sleep, the night was quiet, but my dreams were filled with echoes, Derek's rage, Amanda's tears, the whispers of neighbors spreading faster than wind. The facade had collapsed. What came next would be the rubble, and in rubble, sometimes, the truth grows loudest. By morning, the whispers wouldn't just be neighbors gossiping. They would echo in places Derek couldn't escape, church pews, diner booths, and the very heart of the community. I spent decades signing checks. Now I'm signing chains broken. Sunday morning arrived gray and heavy, the kind of sky that promised rain even if it never delivered. I hadn't planned to go to church, but something in me needed to stand beneath that roof again, to feel the weight of hymns and the hush of prayer. I walked in quietly, taking a seat near the back. The familiar creak of the pew under me was almost comforting. People turned, nodding, some offering small smiles. But I noticed how quickly their gazes shifted toward the front doors, expectant, waiting. They didn't wait long. Derek and Amanda entered together, though the space between them felt wide as an ocean. Derek's shoulders were stiff, chin high, as if pride alone could rebuild the facade already crumbling. Amanda walked slower, eyes down, her hand clutching the strap of her purse like a lifeline. The congregation's reaction was immediate. Heads turned, whispers rippled like a wave through the sanctuary. "That's them." "Fraud," I heard. "Imagine doing that to your own father." The hymns began, voices rising, but the whispers didn't die. They wove through the music, louder than the organ itself. Pastor Miller stepped up to the pulpit. His voice carried, firm and steady. "Today we speak of truth. Of how truth may be buried under lies, but never destroyed. For when the storm clears, truth stands taller than deceit." I felt the words settle in my chest like stones finding their place. Across the aisle, Derek shifted uncomfortably, his jaw clenched, Amanda's eyes glistening. After the sermon, the crowd spilled into the foyer, coffee cups clinking, conversations hushed but pointed. I moved slowly, listening. "Can't even look him in the eye," one man muttered. "She used to smile at everyone. Now she hides," a woman whispered. "They thought they could take everything. Look how it's turned." I sipped from a paper cup, standing near the corner, the folder of documents resting against my side. I had brought it deliberately, not to flaunt, but to remind myself that truth was still mine to carry. Amanda glanced across the room and froze when she saw it. Her lips parted, her face pale. She tugged Derek's sleeve, whispering urgently, but he pulled away, his pride too thick to bend even now. The conversations around them grew louder, bolder. Neighbors who once flattered Derek now turned their backs. A woman at the pastry table shifted her plate just as Amanda reached for a cookie, leaving her hand hovering in empty air. The small cruelties cut sharper than shouts ever could. I stood straighter, the folder pressed firmly under my arm. I didn't need to speak, the community was speaking for me now. Then Derek snapped. His voice cut through the room, louder than the chatter. "Enough. You think you're all better than me? You think he's some saint?" He jabbed a finger toward me, his face flushed. "You don't know what he's really like." The room went silent. Dozens of eyes turned, not to him, but to me. I met his glare, calm, unflinching. "Then tell them," I said evenly. My voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. The truth was already louder. Derek's mouth opened, but nothing came. Amanda tugged his sleeve again, whispering desperately, but he shook her off. Pastor Miller stepped forward, his hand raised slightly. "The truth defends itself, Derek. And right now, all anyone sees is a man trying to escape it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some turned away from Derek altogether. Others whispered openly, no longer hiding their judgment. Amanda's eyes brimmed with tears. She pressed her hands together as if praying, her gaze flicking between Derek and me. She looked as if she wanted to speak, to apologize, but the moment slipped as Derek stormed toward the doors, shoving them open so hard they slammed against the wall. The crowd gasped, then quieted again. Amanda lingered a second longer, her face pale, her body trembling. Then she followed him out, her heels clicking against the tile like the echoes of defeat. I remained still, sipping my coffee, the folder resting firmly against me. For years, I had been silent while they spun their stories, while neighbors whispered doubts. But now, the whispers belonged to them, not me. The shift was complete. Derek had stormed out under the weight of truth, but I knew he wouldn't surrender quietly. The next time he came back, it wouldn't just be anger, it would be desperation sharpened into something far more dangerous. The truth defends itself, Derek. And right now, all anyone sees is a man trying to escape it. The week after the church confrontation, I received a call from the bank. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but the words carried the weight of a hammer. "Mr. Harper, we need you to come in. There's been another document filed under your name. It involves the deed to your property." The world seemed to tilt for a moment. Forged loans were one thing, but the deed? That was the ground beneath my feet, the roof over my head, the very symbol of everything I had built. I drove to the bank, each mile heavy, the folder pressed against the passenger seat like a co-pilot. Inside, the banker led me to a private room. He spread the papers across the table. "This," he said, tapping the top sheet, "claims you transferred ownership of your home to your son. It bears your signature." My eyes fell on the lines of ink. The loops, the slant, it was uncanny. But I knew every curve of my own handwriting. And I knew this was not mine. "They've escalated," the banker murmured, his eyes flicking to mine. "This isn't sloppy. Whoever drafted this knew exactly what they were doing." I traced the signature with my finger, the fury burning cold instead of hot. Derek's arrogance had gone beyond betrayal, it had reached theft. "Can it be challenged?" I asked. "Not only challenged," the banker said firmly. "It can be destroyed. With proof." I opened the folder and slid out copies of earlier statements, signatures across decades. My signature, real, consistent, irrefutable. Evidence against the forgery. The banker studied them, his expression hardening. "This will hold," he said. "We'll back you." That night at the motel, I sat at the desk, the folder open before me. For weeks it had been my shield. Tonight, it became my sword. I thought of my wife's handwriting in the margins of old statements, her dreams scribbled beside the numbers, plans for a cabin, for grandchildren's futures, for peace. Derek had tried to turn those dreams into tools of greed. But I would make sure her handwriting outlived his schemes. I dialed Ms. Graves, my lawyer. "I want everything changed," I told her. "The inheritance, the estate, all of it." She hesitated. "Changed how?" "Derek and Amanda get nothing. Every dollar, every property, every account, it goes to the Veterans Fund. Men and women who sacrificed for this country deserve it more than children who spit on sacrifice." There was silence on the line, then her voice softened. "Are you sure? That's permanent." I looked down at the folder, the ink of my wife's handwriting glowing faintly in the lamplight. "Permanent is the point." The next day, I met her in her office. We went line by line, page by page. As the legal papers were prepared, I signed them one by one. Each signature was more than ink, it was a nail sealing Derek's coffin of entitlement. By the time I finished, my hand ached, but my heart felt lighter. When I left the office, I walked to the courthouse to file the documents officially. The clerk stamped them with a dull thud, final and absolute. Derek could forge, he could scheme, he could rage, but he could no longer touch what was mine. Outside, the autumn wind whipped leaves around my feet. I looked up at the courthouse steps, the sky a deep gray above. And for the first time in months, I felt taller than the storm. That evening, back at the motel, the phone rang. Derek's voice burst through the speaker, raw and frantic. "What did you do?" he shouted. "The lawyer called, the accounts, the deed, everything's changed. You can't do this to me." I let him rage, his words tumbling into panic. Then, when he finally paused for breath, I answered. "I already did." There was silence, then the hollow sound of his breath catching. "You'd give everything to strangers before your own blood?" His voice cracked. I stared at the folder on the desk, my wife's handwriting catching the lamplight again. "Strangers never betrayed me." "You did." I hung up, the click final, the silence sweeter than any argument. The motel clock ticked on, steady and sure. Outside, headlights swept across the thin curtains, then disappeared. I sat back, the folder closed now, but no longer heavy. For the first time, it felt like freedom. Derek thought he could steal the ground from under me. But tomorrow, when the news spread, he would realize the ground had been ripped out from under him instead. "Strangers never betrayed me." "You did." The courthouse smelled of old wood and cold stone, a place where time itself seemed to hold its breath. I sat at the plaintiff's table, the folder resting neatly before me, its edges worn smooth from weeks of war. The same folder Derek once dismissed as clutter now sat like a gavel, heavy with truth. The bailiff called the session to order. Derek and Amanda entered together, though they looked nothing like the polished couple they once presented to the world. Derek's suit was wrinkled, his tie crooked. Amanda's eyes were swollen, makeup streaked from tears. They slid into their seats, but the weight of the room seemed to press them down. The judge, an older man with a gaze sharp as a hawk, shuffled the papers before him. "Mr. Harper," he began, "your counsel has presented compelling evidence of fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation. Today's hearing will determine final disposition of the estate." My lawyer, Ms. Graves, nodded to me. I placed a hand on the folder, grounding myself, then nodded back. Derek rose suddenly, his voice breaking through the hush. "Your Honor, please, this is a misunderstanding. My father, he doesn't understand. He's confused, manipulated. He doesn't know what he's signing anymore." The judge's gaze shifted to me. "Mr. Harper, are you confused?" I stood, my voice steady. "No, Your Honor. I know exactly what I signed. And I know exactly what they tried to steal." Amanda shot up next, her voice trembling, pleading. "William, please, don't do this. We made mistakes, yes, but we're family. You can't just cut us out completely." I turned to her, my eyes cold but calm. Family doesn't forge signatures. Family doesn't drain accounts. Family doesn't treat a father like trash at his own dinner table. Her hands clasped together as though in prayer, tears spilling freely. "We'll change. I'll change. Just, don't leave us with nothing." For the first time, Derek's mask cracked. He reached toward me, his hand trembling, his voice raw. "Dad, please. I was wrong. I see it now. I'll fix it, I swear. Just give us one more chance." The courtroom was silent except for his voice. Even the creak of wooden benches stilled as people leaned in, eyes wide. I placed the folder on the table deliberately, the sound echoing like a gavel. I leaned forward. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed every sacrifice your mother and I made. Every hour I worked, every dollar I saved, you turned it into poison. And now you want forgiveness as if the wounds aren't still bleeding." Derek's face crumpled, his knees buckling as he sank back into his chair. Amanda sobbed openly, hiding her face in her hands. The judge's voice filled the silence. "The evidence is overwhelming. The estate is hereby secured under Mr. Harper's sole authority. The attempted transfer of property is void. The defendant's claims are dismissed. Furthermore, criminal charges may proceed based on the forged documents." The gavel struck once. Final. Absolute. Gasps filled the room. Some shook their heads, others whispered. The fall of Derek and Amanda was no longer private, it was carved into the record of the court. As the bailiff stepped forward, Derek looked at me one last time. His eyes were bloodshot, hollow. "Please, Dad, don't let them take me away. I'm still your son." Amanda reached for me, her voice hoarse. "William, forgive us. Please." I picked up the folder, holding it close to my chest. My voice was quiet, but it carried through the entire courtroom. Forgiveness isn't inheritance. And inheritance isn't forgiveness. The bailiff laid a hand on Derek's shoulder. His face broke completely as he was led away, Amanda's sobs chasing him down the aisle. I sat back down, the folder still in my arms, my heart heavy but unshaken. For the first time, the power was mine, not through rage or revenge, but through truth, finally standing tall. The courthouse doors closed behind them, but I knew one final stage remained. The world outside, the neighbors, the community, would need to see not just their fall, but my dignity restored. Forgiveness isn't inheritance. And inheritance isn't forgiveness. When the gavel struck for the last time, I knew the courtroom had sealed Derek's fate, but it was what waited outside those heavy doors that would define mine. The hallway buzzed with voices, footsteps echoing off stone walls. As I stepped through the double doors, folder tucked under my arm, the chatter quieted. Reporters with notepads, neighbors who had slipped in to watch the show, and townsfolk who had heard the rumors, all of them turned their eyes on me. Derek and Amanda followed minutes later. He was flanked by the bailiff, wrists stiff in cuffs, his suit wrinkled and dignity shredded. Amanda trailed behind, her face streaked with tears, her shoulders hunched like a woman already buried under shame. The crowd reacted instantly. Murmurs surged like a tide. So it's true. He forged his own father's name? And she helped? No one rushed to comfort them. No one reached out a hand. People who once laughed at Derek's jokes in church pews, who shook his hand at the diner, now stepped back as if his touch carried rot. Pastor Miller approached me, his hand firm on my shoulder. "Truth defends itself," he said softly. And today, it stood taller than lies. I nodded, the folder pressing heavy against my ribs. It cost me everything I thought I had. But it gave me back everything I almost lost. As we walked outside, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, sharp and bright. The courthouse steps were crowded with more neighbors, waiting. Some nodded as I passed. Others offered quiet greetings, the kind you give to a man whose dignity has been restored. Derek tried to speak, his voice hoarse, desperate. "He's lying. He set me up." But the sheriff pulled him toward the waiting car. The murmurs around us weren't sympathetic anymore. They were disgusted. He had everything handed to him. And he threw it away. His father deserved better. Amanda, pale and trembling, glanced at me once. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. She lowered her head, disappearing into the car beside Derek. I stood at the top of the courthouse steps, the folder still in my hand. For weeks, it had been my shield, my weapon, my anchor. Now it was simply truth bound in cardboard, truth that had carried me through betrayal and humiliation into vindication. A woman from the congregation approached, her voice quiet. "Mr. Harper, you showed strength most of us couldn't. You didn't just fight for yourself. You fought for what's right." I bowed my head slightly. I didn't want to fight my son. But I couldn't let him erase me. The crowd parted as I stepped down the stairs, their eyes following me not with pity anymore, but with respect. For the first time in months, I felt the ground under my feet was solid. Mine. That evening, I didn't go back to the motel. I went to the church instead. The building was empty, the air cool and still, stained glass casting colors across the pews. I walked slowly to the front, the folder held in both hands. I set it gently on the altar. "This was my burden," I whispered, my voice echoing in the hollow space. "It carried my sacrifices, my mistakes, and my dignity. Now it carries only truth. And no one will twist it again." For a moment, I simply stood there, the silence wrapping around me. Then I stepped back, leaving the folder in the glow of colored light. As I turned to go, I felt lighter, not because the pain was gone, but because I had given it a resting place. Outside, the night air was crisp, carrying the distant sound of laughter from the diner down the street. Life went on. And so would I. My son and his wife had tried to strip me of everything, respect, dignity, even the ground beneath my feet. But in the end, they had lost their place, while I regained mine. I walked away from the church with my head high, no folder in my hands, but dignity in my heart. That was something no betrayal could ever take. If you liked this story, like the video, subscribe, and share your impressions in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. I didn't want to fight my son. But I couldn't let him erase me.